Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our monthly webinar series here at Abram Interstate. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for this call. Sometimes we like to partner with our carriers in order to bring you these, and this is the case this time. We are partnering with Kristen Hazard from United States Liability Insurance for this month's edition to focus on nonprofit business and specifically House of Worship as well. So a few things before we begin, just a couple housekeeping items for the call this morning. We are using WebEx as our technology. First off, everyone is on mute, so if you start talking into your mic expecting a response, we cannot hear you, so please know that starting out. As you log in to make the presentation full screen, you'll see that the presentation is kind of in a box, either in the lower left or the lower right hand corner, depending upon your computer system. If you scroll to the upper right hand side, the upper right corner of that window, there are two arrows pointing away from each other. If you click on those arrows, it will make the presentation full screen. If you ever want to get out of that full screen mode, you can hit escape or scroll your mouse to the top. Another menu bar will appear, a blue menu bar, and you can get out of the full screen mode. Questions. Please enter your questions into the WebEx chat or the Q&A. We're going to attempt to monitor both of those during the webinar, but also know that at the end of our presentation, we're going to have a dedicated question and answer section. So if throughout the call you ask some questions in that Q&A, we might just hold that to the end of the call where it might be more appropriately answered at that point. In addition, we are going to have trivia questions throughout the presentations. The first to answer or the first to get the answer absolutely correct and or a closest to after about 15 seconds, we'll award that person to be the winner. The winner gets a $20 Amazon gift card. We have all of your information from your registration for this, so we'll automatically send that to you at the end of the call. We are recording this, so if you don't catch everything, we're going to send it out after this. I'm going to edit the video up and send it, so give us a couple days. We'll send the video along with the presentation deck and slides to everyone in a PDF format. Timing the presentation, we try to keep this tight, 30 to 35 minutes, and then the Q&A at the end. If it runs a little long or a little short, just know that's what we try to keep it to. Also today, we are California wholesalers. Most of our customers and brokers and agents and insureds are California-based, so we're going to focus on the underwriting appetite for California. We do write outside of California. We can write in 11 western states, so if you think of New Mexico to the Canadian border and then west, that is our footprint. There might be some variance with some of our carriers in their appetite in those states, as well as if they're admitted or non-admitted. We do not write non-admitted in all of those states. We write in some of them. So it just depends on how the product falls in that particular state. For more questions about that, just please contact our office directly, and we can answer those questions that you might have. All right, as I begin here, my name is John Poucher. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager with Abram Interstate. I'm really just going to be doing the beginning and the end and the trivia. Most of our call today is going to be handled by Kristen Hazard from USLI. And Kristen, why don't you take it from here?
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, John. And I'm very excited to be here to represent. Thank you so much, everybody. Really excited to be here to share and represent what we're doing in the houses of worship sector. This really, you can also consider this to be religious institutions, churches. We call it a lot of different things. So, you know, we'll use a lot of different terminology, but I want to really make note that we're really trying to be as broad as possible. So just kind of some things that we wanted to share in today's presentation is why are we a great fit for nonprofit organizations and in our partnership with ABRAM. So we'll go over that. We'll talk about what the opportunity is, and we'll share the products that are related specifically to houses of worship. And then ultimately really close the day with how do you get a quote, because I'm sure that's what you're curious about. But just so you know, from an opportunity standpoint, when I say nonprofit, a lot of people think, well, this is a small niche. It really is not. There's over 2.4 million nonprofit entities in the United States. That number actually doesn't even include the number of churches that are out there. There's over 350,000. But when we look at nonprofits, there's a significant growing opportunity. Many of them are small, and they continue to grow year over year at a rate of 5%. So that just really represents a nice, stable area to focus on, and that's why we've really spent a lot of time in building a specific division for nonprofit. Now, nonprofits tend to have some common issues where you can really come in and save the day. One thing, it's difficult for them to place insurance because they have a variety of operations. Even a simple church may have a shelter exposure, some counseling. They may be doing things for the community. And not every carrier really likes that variety. So that's one thing that may be an issue. They may struggle to get access to coverage. They don't know where to go from an insurance standpoint. They may have insurance already, and there are likely big gaps in coverage. One that we'll talk about today is abuse and molestation. There are plenty of churches out there today that don't have coverage for those allegations, and so it's something that should be a concern, and you can help address that. They're not necessarily aware of their own exposures. And then one that really impacts this sector is that there's just changes in carrier appetite and position. We found with a lot of the nonprofits and with houses of worship today, carriers have either decided to pull out of the market or kind of reevaluate how they're handling the risks, and it's caused a lot of pain, whether that means renewal rate increases or changes in coverage conditions. So again, that all spells out kind of opportunity for you to come in and maybe find a better solution. But to add on to some of the questions that nonprofits are wondering, they're always thinking about general liability where there's slips and falls, and they may be concerned about what they might say in the pulpit and things like that. They forget about event liability if they're doing something outside of the normal course operations and whether or not that's covered. They don't want to think that they have issues with abuse and molestation, and they probably don't, but it comes down to who's alleging that there might be a concern. They don't even know about errors and omissions a lot of times that they're providing a professional service. And then we get to even more sophisticated things like management liability and misappropriation of funds, and if they're doing the right things with the community's concerns. So a lot of these are not immediately considered, and these are all things that we can help you address. So our products are built for the small nonprofit, for the small church, where we can incorporate all of these different coverages in a very easy, efficient manner. So we're doing up to 8 lines of coverage, and really only working with one underwriter, one application, one policy. And what's even better is we can give you these solutions over the phone. Dialing that number 888-845-1626 will get you in touch with an underwriter who can either just help answer questions and give you some guidance as to what kind of information you might need to quote, or if you've got everything, we can give you a quote in probably about 5 minutes. You can also, self-serve, go online as well to that website right there and quote. But I do recommend trying the phone number because oftentimes you do a better job of communicating the risk to us just verbally, and it helps us we find that we bind a lot more regularly when we use the phone as a platform. So just as awareness, we're talking mainly about houses of worship today, but there are a lot of other nonprofits that we can consider. This is just a sample list. So, just keep ABRAM in mind for when you do run into those. And here, if you break them down outside of classes of business, is just a representation of the different industry segments. And if you ever want for a future webinar us to focus in any of these different areas, whether it be social services, condo homeowner, sports, we'd be happy to do that for you.
All right, thank you, Kristen. And I'm going to handle the first trivia question here. If I can get control back. There we go. Got that back. Let me get the Q&A box and the chat box open. Okay, so our first trivia question, so how this is going to work, again, is I'm going to ask a question. This question is going to be most likely a closest to, unless somebody gets the exact number, which I'm not sure that's going to be possible. I'll give you about 10 seconds to type in your answer into the chat or the Q&A box. So Kristen already talked about how the market opportunity with nonprofits nationwide, but how does that relate to California, since most of us are in California? So how many, let me get here, nonprofit organizations of all statuses are there in California? All right, so go ahead and chat your answers into the Q&A. Got a couple answers coming through. If you have any problems, you scroll to the blue bar, and there should be a chat button there. Okay. If anybody else has any other answers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So the answer is, 144,728 nonprofit organizations in California. This is according to the independent sector of their aggregator of data in California. This is as of 2016 is their information. So Sue Lee, you won. You entered 300,000, so you're the winner. I'll be emailing you later today with your Amazon gift card. So congratulations, Sue. Kristen, I think you can just take it back.
All right, perfect. So, that if we wrote all of them, that would be like over $4 million, so let's go for it. All right, so moving along now, let's talk specifically about houses of worship. And I'm deliberately saying houses of worship because I don't want to just denote that we're only doing a certain kind of space. We can look at all denominations. We can look if they're brand new, if they've been very established, if they are renting space from another entity, then we call those storefronts or tenant-based churches, or perhaps they're very well established, have their own building, brick and mortar. We really have the broad eligibility there. And we're looking mainly from a USLI standpoint for houses of worship that are up to 30,000 square feet for each congregation. Now, Abram will have options for you outside of that, and we even have options through Devon Park, a sister company of ours, for much larger ones. But just to make you aware, anything that you're going to be calling in over the phone is going to be limited to that 30,000 square feet. We do not have a designated premises endorsement. This is valuable because churches aren't always going to be staying at their church location, so they need coverage that's going to follow them for wherever their operations are. We can include the parsonage exposure, and we actually include that for no additional premium from a general liability standpoint. We can also include the property for that residential exposure. We could just add that on in consideration with the house of worship. And as I mentioned earlier, there may be other exposures such as child care, a soup kitchen, potentially shelters or overnight retreats. These additional exposures are things that we can just evaluate and underwrite and add on. We have a benefit of being able to consider any construction type of any age through protection class 1 through 9. And as I mentioned, there are some expansions. There's things that we're very excited about. First of all, through the partnership with Devon Park, which is another insurance company in our family, they can do houses of worship up to 100,000 square feet and up to $10 million in total insurable value. So that gives you a really broad opportunity and really covers the vast array of different houses of worship that are out there. We've also started to look and expand where there might be more difficult operations associated with the church. Consider perhaps prison ministry, where they're going and counseling to individuals who are about to be released from prison. We're fine with that as long as it's incidental and it's not really involved in sort of like activism or lobbying or legal representation. Other expansions that I can kind of note are that we can look at when they have international travel, and we just want to make sure they're doing all the right things in play there, so there's some underwriting that goes along with that. We wouldn't cover the international exposure. We'll consider the domestic operations, but we can consider that. And we can also talk about when they have exposure such as like camps or the retreats, as we mentioned earlier. But, these are some of the bigger concerns that we have and how we'd like to have those addressed. We want to make sure they're going to what we consider to be acceptable regions, and that they have a forward liability policy in place to really address all of those exposures outside of the United States. Now, from a coverage standpoint, we have a few things that I want to really point out. First of all, just as a basic level, we have comprehensive general liability and property coverage that we'll be, including in this. With that general liability, since we don't have that premises liability, there's special events that are automatically included. And, let's consider if they have a pancake breakfast or a little community outing, a festival of some sort. All of that would be contemplated as long as it's not a higher hazard activity. For the property standpoint, also included with that would be the crime and employee dishonesty. This is something that a lot of churches are very concerned about. It makes me sad to think that anybody would steal from a church, but it does happen, and it's something that we can easily include in the policy. And abuse and molestation is available up to $1 million. Now, one thing I like to note is that let's just say if we work on a risk today and we're not aware of what limit they're looking for, the quote will automatically come with a 100-300 sublimit. So that 100-300 sublimit for abuse and molestation is typically what most little startups or tenant-based churches need, and it works out great for them. But if you need increased limits, we can absolutely do that. That 100-300 is free. Anything above that will come out with a flat charge. Just let us know what limit you're looking for. We also include the pastoral professional up to $1 million, and that's kind of key for a lot of their operations that may involve with counseling to their parishioners or their church members. And lastly, the directors and officers liability is a key piece to the puzzle of what we've got going on. I think I might have lost control of the presentations.
Can you get it back?
There we go. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your patience there. With the directors and officers, I really want to highlight something that's very excited, and this will apply to really any type of nonprofit outside of houses of worship as well. So it's broader than just this sector. But effective July 19th, we released a new form in the state of California, and first and foremost, it included a reduced pricing, which makes the product a lot more competitive depending upon the hazard level. But probably what's more exciting are the coverage grants that come along with it. So our form was already very positive when you consider the individual director or officer in place. And if that's who you're talking to, whether that's the treasurer of the board, whether that's the president, secretary, they're always concerned about protecting their own personal assets, and they're always concerned about what the other board members may do that may impact them. So first of all, we do include a coverage grant called a lifetime occurrence reporting provision, which is essentially like an occurrence feature for the individual director or officer. It gives them lifetime coverage as long as they're not a part of the decision to cancel or non-renew, and it comes into play if a future board at some point is bare. So that's critical. But along with that, we also offer $1 million Side A coverage, and that's just another $1 million limit for that really worst possible day. So let's imagine that the church itself is bankrupt, they're in the middle of a claim, that is a limits loss, so there's no longer anything available. There, outside of that, is still a $1 million limit coverage for the individual director or officer that they can call upon if they're individually named in a suit. That's just critical. No additional premium. That's automatically covered. We also have express coverage for the wrongful acts committed through social media, which is a more common problem these days since social media is so prevalent. So if they're sending, let's say, pictures that might be offensive through LinkedIn, and it's as a representative of the church, that could obviously be triggered here. And there's a lot more. It's just something very good to know that you have a very comprehensive form at your disposal, and it's now even less expensive. So with all of that, you can get a very strong policy that will be broad enough to go wherever they go, get the special events coverage, cover any sort of incendiary comments they might make from the pulpit or print or whatever. What do you need to get a quote now? Well, it's simple, actually. Really don't need much. We need, at a basic level, just to give you a rate, we need the square footage for church operations. And let's say they have other operations, well, then we'll need the breakout of what that square footage fits for those other operations. From a property standpoint, we're going to look at the building values and the construction type, where it's located, so protection class, and make sure that we have all of that information down. Ages of buildings and all that was helpful too. And then from a D&O standpoint, if that's something they're concerned about, we're going to look at annual revenue and ultimately their employee count. That will get you right from any of those different pieces, and you can quote, you don't have to quote all of them together, you can pick or choose what it is that you need. And I think with that, we're at our next trivia question, so go ahead, John.
Sure, Kristen, what does COPE stand for, just so if anybody's unaware of what that means?
Absolutely, great question. It's just construction type occupancy, which we would know would be the church or other operations. And then it would be protection class, so protections and protection class. So if they have like a central station burglar alarm, any of that would be helpful to know. And the other exposures that are around that church building.
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. One more question that agents might be wondering, is this product admitted in California or is it not admitted?
Great question. When it's 30,000 square feet and under, it's an admitted product. In the event that is larger one through our sister company, that would be a non-admitted offering at this time, but predominantly admitted. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Second trivia question. If you guys can open up your chat boxes and your Q&A box one more time. Be ready for this one. And more than likely, we're going to get some people get this one exact. So first to answer it exactly correct is most likely going to be our winner. I'm going to take this from you, Kristen. Let me, there we go. The question is, what is the maximum total square footage and total insured value, TIV, of property at any single location that can be considered? 30,000 is for the USLI product. We can go above that with Devon Park. That's correct. I think Bruce got it first, 100,000. So it's 100,000 square feet and up to 10 million TIV or total insured value for any single location. So that's our maximum appetite for that kind of product and property value. And there are some that we get in that are over that. So just be aware of that. There are, the mega churches is on the rise, and so we do get asked about that from time to time. More than likely, like Kristen said, a majority of churches are considerably under that, and most of them will fit in within the appetite of 30,000 square feet or under, and that's something that you can quote directly yourself via the instant quote. If it is 30,000 square feet or above, we are going to ask for accords, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide as well. So, Kristen, you can grab the control back.
All right. Okay, so yeah, our goal is really to make it as quick and easy for you. Ultimately, we all just want to compete and show you what we can do. So really use any application. If, in the past you've worked with a specialty carrier and they have all of these different supplementals, you've already got it all completed, send that on over. That's totally fine. I think any carrier is good at asking questions that we can gather the information we need. If it is a church that's 30,000 square feet and under, then just pick up the phone and dial that number, 888-845-1626. An underwriter will go through pretty much our application, and then the cool thing is once you've got all of that information entered in and you've talked with the underwriter, they're going to send you that quote. You'll see your price. You'll see that it's on admitted status. You'll see all of your different options listed on the quote. But behind that quote's also going to be a pre-filled application. And I like to point this out because as you go through that conversation on the phone, you may have limited information at that time. You may not know all of the specifics about their operation. So we still may need to find some information out to verify that it is eligible for the quote. And that application is a great way to get that accomplished. So we'll enter in what we already know, and then everything else will be just up to you to go and get that completed and then submitted for when you're ready to bind. If you'd prefer, we do also have digital applications that we can send that are available for completion as well. So ultimately,
Kristen, can you go back to that?
Oh,
Kristen, can I jump in real quick? Yeah.
You go right ahead.
Just to highlight the phone, I'm going to talk about Abram, our internal numbers with the phone system versus the online system. The phone system, when our agents call, 96% of the time they get a quote. And our average bind ratio is in the low 30s, so 31 to 33, it fluctuates. Online, the quote percentage drops down to about 70%, and then our bind ratio is about 18%. So the online system is great. It's really slick. It's really easy, but it is black and white. So you might not understand the questions correctly, and like Kristen talked about earlier, sometimes it's a lot easier to explain the risk to an underwriter and help them guide you through the product to be able to get a quote. So just from our internal numbers, I mean, there's a significant difference of picking up the phone and getting a quote versus going online. So I highly recommend the phone quote, but, you know, we don't stop anybody from quoting online if that's their absolute preferred method of doing business. Back to you, Kristen.
Great point. Yeah, I would say that's a great point, and I even find, just kind of to add to what you're saying there, is that when I'm able to talk to somebody about the account, I usually can find out where I can apply credits and make it more competitive. Whereas, you know, it just might not be something that's readily available when you're quoting online, or if I'm just looking at an accord that's barely filled out. You know, sometimes it's hard to determine that. So I think sometimes you're able to describe it a lot better and get us to where we can compete a lot more. So kind of there, we're just sort of wrapping up just to let you know that this is, you know, just kind of the beginning of what we can offer. You know, if there are ever any questions, it's always great to just ask, and we'll be happy to walk through anything that you may have. But with that, I think I'll just turn it back over to you, John.
All right. Yeah, thank you, everyone, for joining our call this morning. We really appreciate you taking the time. We're going to open it up to the question and answer segment. So if you need to drop off the call, you can go ahead and do so now, and we're going to start answering some questions. So the first one that I see is, how do prior losses come into play?
Well, nobody would write business with prior losses, would they? No, it's a great question. You know, from time to time we look at what's happened, and so it really depends on the line of coverage. So I'll go through this real briefly. For instance, property, there's just sometimes lightning strikes, as an example. It's not something they can necessarily prevent, and it's not something that's likely to happen again. There, we're just going to want to make sure that they've made the right changes to the building, you know, repaired any damage, things like that. If you've got frequency issues where they're consistently having like a pipe leak and there's issues with that, well, I don't know if I'd be so excited about writing the risk, just because to me that says they're not necessarily maintaining the property well enough. So maybe once, maybe twice if it's like some small losses, but when we start to see that there's multiple years of dealing with this issue and they still haven't gotten repaired, I may not be able to do a line of coverage simply because of that. So that's how we look at it, is this a management issue or a maintenance issue, or is this just kind of a freak occurrence and they made all the right repairs and we're good to go? From a general liability standpoint, a lot of that still comes into play. You know, if somebody slips and falls and it's really because of their own clumsiness or whatever, well, then that's fine. But if we find instead they're doing trust falls and people keep falling because the rest of the church congregation doesn't catch them, or, you know, snake charming and people are getting bit, I don't mean to make some silly comments, but if it's because of their operations they're having frequent general liability losses, or something as extenuating as, you know, abuse and molestation allegation, well, then that may be where we don't consider writing the risk. And then lastly, with directors and officers and employment practices, if you have a discrimination loss or, you know, issues with decisions the board have made, the question is how deep does this go? Is it a very recent claim? Is it something that they could have repaired how they handle certain situations? You know, maybe they replaced a treasurer and things that are all okay now. So ultimately, we're open to the conversation, but we want to understand the nature of the risk. We want to understand what measures have they taken in response, And then we have those options of, do we just want to write it? Do we want to write it at a higher rate? Do we want to write it with certain exclusionary language? Or do we just want to avoid it altogether? So there's the long answer to your short question.
Yeah, losses are always fun. It seems like it's always a it depends kind of situation. Next question is, can we go direct to Abram for church quotes without having farmers decline first? Garrett, that's going to be your decision, but yeah, you can come directly to us. So we would love to quote for you. Bruce asks, you mentioned Devon Park. What other carriers can you mention as Lloyd's of London in the mix? So USLI is our primary carrier for this line of business, but we do have other carriers. Say that the loss issues are something that USLI does not feel comfortable with, and we do have other surplus lines carriers that are interested in this business. We have a multitude of them. So depending upon size, scope, coverage level, we have other carriers in our stable. But USLI is our primary go-to carrier due to online access, the instant quote, the coverage form, the pricing, everything that's been mentioned previously. Let's see here. I think that's the last question. Any other questions, please type them in now. Otherwise, we're going to say goodbye to everyone. And if you have any other further questions that come to you later, just please contact our office here directly at Abram Interstate, and we can get you an answer. All right, I think, okay. Thank you, Chuck. Glad you found it useful. Any suggestions that you have for us to make these webinars more useful and of value to you, please email me, John, J-O-H-N-P @abraminterstate.com, or call me and talk to me and give me suggestions. I'm open for feedback and just want to make these as valuable as possible for everyone, for all the attendees. So I don't see any other questions. We're going to cut it off now. Thank you all again. Really appreciate it. And send us your business for churches and nonprofits. Give us a call at that 888-845-1626 number, or send any paper applications to apps@abraminterstate.com, or go online and quote yourself. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you next time.